All right. Well, this is Ben Dowell here for Adventus, and we're here with Jake. Excited to talk to you, Jake. Why don't we just kick things off? And I see you're at Simon Fraser University in Canada. So give us a little bit more about your background, where you grew up, what you're studying in school, and what are you looking to do after you graduate?
Absolutely. Yeah, as I said, I'm Jake. I'm a Vancouver born and raised in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. I'm a second year here at Simon Fraser University. And for me, when I was considering what I wanted to do in university, I had the choice between a few business schools out east, U of T, Queens, all the big name ones out there, and Simon Fraser University in Vancouver on a scholarship. And I ended up choosing the scholarship. When I got to university, I knew I wanted to do finance, but it was really through conversations, just like this, that I decided on banking. And after doing an internship at a boutique here in Vancouver, very focused on metals and mining in Vancouver,
Nice.
so I completed an internship there, and now I'm looking to go into investment banking for a bigger bank. And a lot of my questions today revolve around recruiting for the states coming from Canada, as well as generally being in Vancouver on the West Coast, how to break into banking on the East Coast in Toronto and New York, where a lot of the jobs are. And yeah, that's kind of the advice I'm hoping to get out today.
Okay. That's cool. So tell me a little bit about the metals and mining experience over the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Vancouver is the hub of a lot of mining companies in Canada. And so there's a lot of smaller boutiques, talking about teams of 5 to 10 working on junior mining companies and mining companies that are in the process of development and or have just started production. And so the company I worked at started about 10 years ago. They took a firm called K92 Mining from exploration to eventually production. They're now a multi-billion-dollar company. And after doing that, some of the founders went and continued to chase deals. So we're a merchant bank, kind of a hybrid of growth equity and sell-side advisory. Did a lot of stuff in equity capital markets, and it was a boutique, but I got to really work on some I got to have some depth in a lot of deals. So, as an intern, I was actually having a hand in modeling, and I was on the calls talking with the CEOs, asking questions. So it was a really good experience, and it confirmed my interest in wanting to
Yeah.
go into advisory.
I mean, fantastic experience. So, the first question we have here from Jake, which is a really cool and interesting question, is, hey, Ben, what strategies do you guys have for Canadians looking to break into the U.S. investment banking market? I think it's a great question, and it's an extension of the question that I've gotten to from a couple other folks around how do I break into banking from a non-core school? But it's a little different, right? Once you start to cross international borders, complexity goes up, not down. But it's certainly not impossible, and it is a path that many have followed. So, if I was, I think the most important things for you to think about first is I guess thinking about your goals. If you're 100% gung ho, I'm going to the U.S. come hell or high water, nothing's going to stop me. Okay, then go for it, and you can absolutely get sponsored. It is doable. Um, but I would say if you're more of the mindset of I really want a banking job and I know that there are lots more opportunities in the US and that's why I'm open to the US, that's a little bit different. And so which camp do you fall in, if I could ask?
I would definitely fall in. Well, I wouldn't say entirely in the first camp. Definitely much more so in the first camp. Getting a job in the U.S. would be preferable if possible.
Well, so the way you answer that tells me you're in the second camp. So
Okay.
I guess what I'm saying, if you were in the first camp, you would turn down a bulge bracket job in Toronto to take a boutique job in Houston, right? And I don't know if you would do that or not, but or to not take a job to get a non-banking job in Houston to work there for 2 years so you could then get a banking job later. You know what I mean? So like it depends on what you're willing to sacrifice. That kind of helps us know what camp you're in. In any case, the first thing I would say is, in Canada, you guys do have a financial center. It is Toronto. It's a massive market, tons of financial activity. And you're going to have an easier time getting traction in inside Canada, right? Let's just just to put it plainly. The way to do that would be very similar to a student in like Colorado, right, or Idaho going to recruit in New York City, right? So how do you do that? Then you're very much in the the non-core school path. The way to do that, yes, is the old school networking, but I would argue is you've got to go farther than that and get boots on the ground. Put fork money out, fly out there, spend 3-4 days, do that once or twice a year. It doesn't, it doesn't have to be, shouldn't be crazy amount. But what you do is you'll build these little trips, and this is going to apply for Chicago if you want to be in the States, or New York, or Boston. But what I'm saying is there's no replacement for getting boots on the ground, especially early before the key recruiting season starts, which is really going to be around. I forgot to ask. You're 27, so you're a sophomore.
Yes.
Yep. So there's just no replacement for getting boots on the ground. Why? Let's just go back to the whole essence of recruiting is about reducing risk. You are looked at as a risky proposition by every banker, not because of anything unique to you, Jake, but just because you're an undergraduate student. You don't have years of experience. And the number one thing any banker is trying to screen for is like, is this person committed? Do they know what they're getting into? Do they know what they want to do? Are they going to put their nose to the grindstone, work 80, 90, 100-hour weeks with attention to detail in order to get the job done and win for the client? These are the questions that the bankers have in their mind. One great way to demonstrate that is by putting your money where your mouth is, putting your time where your mouth is, and getting out there and pounding the pavement. That's what we call it. Best advice I ever got was, Ben, you got to get out there and pound the pavement. So this advice is going to be true for whether you're trying to break into Toronto or maybe Montreal, I don't know, right? Or Chicago or New York or Houston even. And so, get there. The way you are successful there is you have to have a networking effort leading up to that. Okay. You've got to have your banks identified in that city, book your trip, and then schedule those in-person meetings. And here's a secret. One of the secrets is use your trip. You don't need book the trip before you have any meetings, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. Then once the trip is booked, use the trip to get meetings. I'll tell you, it's extremely powerful when you receive a cold email and it says, "Hey Ben, I'm traveling to Chicago from Vancouver and I'm going to be in town these 3 days. I'd love to meet with you, grab coffee, take you out to lunch, and just get as much advice from you as I can. I'm really excited to break into investment banking at Baird, at Goldman Sachs, wherever." That type of message, it works great with a warm connection. It works great with an alum, but it works really great with a completely cold connection. Why? Because you're putting yourself out on a limb. You're already saying, I'm going to meet you, not halfway, right? I'm meeting you 99.9% of the way. I just need you to walk outside. That's it. And I'm going to fly all the way in and absorb that cost and everything. And so that's the number one piece of advice I would give is get a trip on the calendar, pound the pavement, get boots on the ground, and build your networking campaign around that trip and use the trip itself as a way to get in-person meetings. It's not the other way around. A lot of people think, I need to schedule these in-person meetings and then have a trip. Nah, forget that. It's the other way around. You're like a rock star traveling to Chicago and you're doing a three show set in Chicago. That's when you're there. That's it. Because now that creates a little bit of scarcity too. Right? You're only in town. You got a couple hours. You only have this. This is the only window that I have. And then I got to be gone off at the plane. I have to go somewhere else. So, I'm going to New York after that. And they're like, whoa, who is this guy? He's jet set. He's going here. He's going there. Sounds interesting. I want to meet this guy. Right? And now again, it's intriguing. It's interesting. So that's the number one thing. Now, the reason it works is because it's hard. It's not easy. It costs money. It's going to take a lot of work on your part to pull that off and make it worth your while. But that's why it's powerful, is because not everybody does it. And you're immediately going to stand out. I'm just saying that you're from Vancouver. I can just imagine being in meetings at Baird on the recruiting team. I'd be like, hey, have you guys met this Jake guy? He flew in from Vancouver to meet me. Can you believe that? Whoa, are you serious? All of a sudden we're having a conversation. The other person I met like literally just got on the train from Northwestern and took a 20-minute train ride downtown, right? And even that's something. But you're going to stand out immediately in a positive way because you've come so far. Again, that applies to New York, that applies to Toronto, and so forth. So you have to do that. There's no substitute for it. And I'm kind of belaboring the point, but do it as many cities as your time and your budget allows, but you've got to do it once or twice. And you want to do it about a month before they start making cuts and deciding who they interview. Right? So if your interviews, what's that?
When do you think the timelines for that would be? I mean, I know things get earlier and earlier every year.
It does change. So it changes, and it's different based on if you're a core school versus a non-target school. But broadly, the timelines are consistent. So let's just say that your main interviews are in February.
Okay.
Let's just say. Again, that's a reason why you should sign up for the Adventist newsletter, because they've got great information on when these internships are opening up, whose applications deadlines are when, and it gets you a sense for when that interviewing timeline is. But let's just say their interviews are in February, then you need to be meeting people in December.
Okay.
And even December, January is a little bit tricky because like half of December is just written off because of the holidays, and same with the first week of January. And so you have this time period that's kind of dead, but isn't totally dead. It's kind of weird. Or it might actually be a great time because especially junior bankers, they're working a lot during the holidays, and maybe they are around. It doesn't hurt to ask, but it's not a full busy time. So, I think we're coming up on it is what I'm trying to say. I think you're looking at first half of December would be great. But if first round interviews are really, say, mid-February, then you're probably okay meeting people in January. But you've got to get people on the phone earlier. So if I were you, I would want to be pushing out a ton of emails, trying to talk to as many people on the phone as I can in November. And then if I'm booking a trip for December 10th through the 14th, then I'm just going to push out 50 emails to people in that city December 1st, looking to schedule meetings for the 10th through the 14th. All right. That's something like that should be effective. But that moves earlier the more those first round interviews move earlier. And you've got to get on their radar before, again, at least a month before interviews. If you don't, you're going to get left behind.
How many of these do you think you could do in a day? I mean, I'm sure you want to set a buffer so you don't want to be meeting like two people at the same time, right?
How many in a day? I mean, look, the good news is there's a lot of hours in a day.
That's right.
I mean, there's no reason. The biggest barrier is going to be geography. So take a city like Chicago. Chicago is going to be easy for you to have a lot of meetings in one day, because all the banks are within a half a mile radius. And so running from one to the other isn't that big a deal. Maybe it's a 15-minute walk, and that would be like your longest walk of the day. So you could meet someone every other hour, like meet for an hour, have an hour off, meet for an hour, have an hour off, like something like that. How many people? I mean, you could meet, 4, 5, 6 people in a long day doing that. So whereas if you're in New York, and then you have one meeting in Midtown and one meeting downtown, you got to get on the subway, you're new to the city, you don't really know your way around. Like now all of a sudden you don't want to be rushing, you don't want to be late, and so you have to build in more buffer time. Right. So you have to be thinking about it. I call it the micro navigation, right? There's the macro navigation getting to the city, but then there's like getting yourself around and understanding how long is it really going to take you to walk 7 blocks. Or Uber 7 blocks, and so forth. So, how many? Don't know. I mean, if you can't get 4 done in a day, then then that's too bad. But you should be shooting for 4 to 6, probably.
Okay.
And if you can ideally, you're finding people are in the same building though. Like a lot of these banks are in the same building or across the street from one another, and especially in Chicago. Chicago, the building I used to work in, the Franklin Center. It's right next to Willis Tower, Sears Tower, and at the time, things have moved a little bit, but at the time you had Credit Suisse, Baird, and William Blair all in the same building. And then Barclays and Bank of America and Goldman Sachs and Lazard, we're all within 3 blocks. So it was a really great, again, you had a lot of density, whereas New York, because Manhattan is so big, you have Midtown and downtown. There's a lot of banks in Midtown. So again, you'll have to, maybe you think about it. I'll do one day at Midtown, one day downtown, something like that. That'll help you maximize. But I would check out Chicago. So the other advice I have for you, breaking in we'll just say as an international student, right? A lot of folks are international. You're international. Maybe it's going to be incrementally easier for you coming from Canada. There's one thing. Versus say, I don't know, versus Thailand, right? Let's just pick a country that's far away. Things that are going to be beneficial. The physical proximity, right? It's easier for you to travel to the States. It's easier to get across the border. That's not a big deal. Travel visas are easy. You just come across the border, right? That's helpful for you. Again, physical proximity, cost of a ticket, all that's very reasonable. The other things like language barrier isn't really there, right? You're a native English speaker. You grew up in Canada. You're speaking English. Do you speak French? Do you speak any other languages?
No, barely.
Okay, well,
I
so
wish.
that could have been a bonus for you, but and those things are helpful. But for anyone, but you are still international, you do still have to get sponsorship, and that can be tricky. So the number one thing is to know what banks sponsor and what banks don't. The rule of thumb is that the larger the bank is, the more likely they are to sponsor. The smaller the bank, the less likely they are. That's a rule of thumb, and you will see exceptions on every side of that scale. The best way to know for sure is to contact real people who work or used to work at that bank who came over as international students.
Okay.
So your number one goal, if you want to come over to the U.S. to be a banker, you want to talk to as many Canadians as you possibly can who did that exact same thing. Like, that should be your top networking priority. Period. It's just good general advice. Network with people who have already done the thing that you're trying to do. And they are going to share with you all of their failures and their lessons learned, and they're going to save you hours and days and weeks and months of headache and pulling your hair out. So I bet you have already talked to a couple of those folks. Have you? And if so, what have you learned?
Yeah, I've talked to a few people who have made the jump, and there seems to be two main streams. And the mainstream a lot of people take is they spend 1 or 2 years in Canada and they get either an internal transfer or a lateral. So that's also pretty common as well, and something
Okay.
I'm looking at.
That makes a lot of sense, right? So get a bank that's already global, right? Go to the Toronto office of Bank of America, right? Great strategy, makes a lot of sense. Also, the other way around, you have CIBC, right? Or
Right.
or I don't know, BMO, right? You've got some of these other banks that are Canadian banks that have U.S. operations. That works too. That might actually be a little easier. I don't know. So I do have one story to share with you. That's the closest story that I have. So there was when I was at Baird and I was on the recruiting team, I was the associate in charge of recruiting for Kellogg, and throughout that process, I helped a lot of folks, not just from Kellogg, but I helped a lot of veterans because I'm a veteran, and just a lot of folks transitioning careers, and also international students break into banking. And so the best success story that I have was there's a particular student, and he was just totally all in to get a banking job in the States, and he was from India, so he had Indian citizenship and just had a student visa, and that's it. And so he needed sponsorship. And so when I talked to him, I was able to help him and give him advice about Baird. I couldn't speak as intelligent. I could give him general advice about other firms, but I worked at Baird and I knew how Baird worked. But you can take this as a lesson and apply it to other firms. And so the unique thing about Baird is that they're headquartered in Milwaukee, all right, which is very important because no other bank is headquartered in Milwaukee.
Right.
And most people don't want to go to Milwaukee. Milwaukee's a great city. Don't get me wrong. I went to college there. Fantastic city. If you want to make a New York banker salary and live in a 50% of the cost of living city, it's a great way to build wealth. But on average, the average MBA, the average Harvard graduate doesn't want to go to Milwaukee, right? Use that to your advantage. So what I coached him to do was I said, look, here's how you're going to be successful. Get in there from day one, never waver, and tell them you want to be in Milwaukee. Just tell them, I want to be in Milwaukee. That's my city. And you got to have a story why. Find a connection to the city. Oh, I visited and I love this. I love that. The art museum. And I liked going to the baseball game and whatever. But like find unique things about the city. Pitch them why Baird as why Milwaukee. And why do I want to be there? And all the great things about being in Milwaukee. That pushed him over the edge. Because they're like, you know what, if you want to come here, because most of the MBAs were saying Chicago, Chicago, Chicago. And they would be turning down offers to Milwaukee to take a Barclays offer in Chicago. So his strategy was sell out from Milwaukee. When you're talking to Baird, now it doesn't mean he wasn't interviewing with other firms. He was, right? But the point is the way he was able to get pushed over the edge at Baird is because he understood the firm. I was able to help him navigate that a little bit. He built connections in Milwaukee, and he was very consistent with his story from the beginning that he was only Milwaukee. So, that is something I would check out because they're going to look at you. I mean, coming from Vancouver or coming from somewhere unique, traveling there. I mean, oh my God, if you travel to Milwaukee, I'm telling you, you should come to Chicago, visit some banks in Chicago. You take the Amtrak. It's a 90-minute train ride from downtown Chicago to downtown Milwaukee. You can walk to Baird from the train station. Like if you do that, bankers are going to meet you for coffee and their mind is going to be blown and you're going to get on people's radar really quickly.
Right.
Like, so that's how you do it. You have to stand apart. And again, physically going there, pounding the pavement, but also knowing a little bit of the inner workings of the bank. What other banks are like that? So William Blair's more Chicago centric. SunTrust in Charlotte. Like if you went from Vancouver to Charlotte, again, like I know that I'm spending a lot of your money here, but yeah, but like but you can see the point. Like there's just no substitute for that, as opposed to the college kid who's already in Charlotte and they're just doing it because it's the easy button, right?
Right.
Immediately you're not hitting the easy button, you're hitting the hard button, and that's going to make you stand out in the right way.
Right. No, that's really valuable. And for me, haven't been very much places in America. I've been to LA and Seattle and Portland. That's about it from the West Coast.
Yeah.
So you are spending some of my money, but it's also, I guess I could take that as a vacation of sorts, maybe stay an extra day.
Yeah, I would definitely do some sightseeing. Come to Chicago, do the architecture boat cruise. They do run that in the cold months. So, all right. So I hope this is helpful. If you got a follow-up question, just hit me with it.
I've got one more question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been doing a lot of networking over the past sort of year in my first year. And so for a lot of these connections, when I first met them, I was not in like the recruiting stage, right? I was in first year, and now I'm starting to enter that stage. What's a good way to follow up with them, remind them, get them kind of back on my radar, or keep them on my radar, and kind of push that towards recruiting?
Okay. So there are some okay. So you're asking kind of some standard networking follow-up types of questions. So our recommended formula: reach out, do that initial call, and then you do have to stay in touch. And I would recommend, it depends on the timing. You don't want to be pinging somebody every week, but I recommend two very specific things. Number one is it's important to give. When I say give, I don't mean give, a present or money or give 10 hours of your time. I mean, give them an update. Give them something. Don't ask for anything, right? So if you talk to them and 2 weeks goes by or 3 weeks goes by, send an email that says, hey, I really appreciated, I was thinking back to our conversation 3 weeks ago. I really appreciated your advice on X, and here's something that I'm working on right now. Here's a quick update from my situation. I'm in deeper discussions with these 3 banks, but I'm still really interested in your bank, blah, blah, blah. That's it. You're just kind of giving them an update. Here's what's going on with me. You're thanking them for their time. That's going to help you stay on their radar. You've got to do that. Then a week or two later, you need an impetus. You need some reason to reach out. And that can be a little tricky because it needs to be a real reason. Doesn't mean you can't push the envelope and kind of create a reason, but you need a reason to reach out to ask for more advice. So for example, it could be, hey, I just got an interview at this firm. I was wondering if I could get 15 minutes of your time because I wanted to ask you about this. Right? And so there's a change on your side. You need some advice in the moment. Presumably this person said, hey, if you got any other questions, just let me know, right? They all say, for the most part, they all say that. But no one ever takes them up on that. I'm going to tell you that right now. I've talked to hundreds of students, hundreds. Every single one I tell them to send me questions, 1% actually does. But those 1% stand out for the right reasons. Now, then there's the 0.1% that like is very rarely, but it does happen. Then they send too many questions, and it could be overwhelming. But most people don't. Everyone's terrified of that. That's why they don't reach out at all. But if you do it, again, think of like a delicate spice. Okay, you're like a delicate spice. Just sprinkle it in just a little bit. All right, just a little sprinkle in. Think of it more like that. Sprinkle in an email, just one little email. It should be 3 sentences. If it's longer than 3 sentences, you're just wrong. You're just wrong. Thank them. Name something specific they told you that was valuable. Tell them what you're doing next. And thank them again and sign off. That's it. That's going to be refreshing to receive because you're not asking for anything. You're giving. Right? You're not taking, you're giving. You've got to give before you take. And so that's a key strategy that most people don't do because they don't want to be a burden. Well, if you don't want to be a burden, then don't be a burden. Don't ask for anything. Just give. Then once you've given, then if you have an impetus, like an interview or something happened, maybe even a news event. Hey, I want it. Maybe there's a news event that's in metals and mining, and you talk to someone in metals and mining, like, hey, I saw this big transaction come down. I'm trying to prepare a walkthrough of that transaction, and I had a couple technical questions for you. Right? Something like that. Like you invented the impetus, right? It wasn't something else that happened. That was your choice to do that. But it is something real, right? You are working on preparing, and you do want to speak more intelligently about these deals. So it's not fake. I just want to be clear, right? You created it, and it's real to help you be successful in the recruiting process. People want to be helpful. They do. They do want to be helpful, but they want their time to be respected, and they want their advice to be really taken to heart. So show them that you're going to respect their time, you're going to be efficient with your communication, and you're going to write down every effing word that they say. If you show them that, they're going to be happy to spend time with you.
Right. I appreciate that advice a lot. Thank you.
Okay. I'll go on. So I hope I answered that. And this is great. I mean, I'm looking at some of your responses. I mean, you're saying that you spoke with 150 people across financial services. Like, that's fantastic. Like, there's absolutely no replacement for speaking to that many people. Most people think, oh, I'm going to speak to 5 or 10 people. Then I did networking, and now I'm done. And when I hear that, I'm like, nope. Whatever number you think you need to talk to, multiply that times 10, right? Because you need to keep on going. It's as simple as that. It's when you're doing something that's difficult and complex, you've got to get reps, and get those reps in low risk situations. Before you move into the higher risk situations. Higher risk meaning like talking to an MD who actually calls the shots with recruiting. If you kind of annoy them, then they'll be like, delete. I talked to that kid. He sucks. Done. And then you're gone. You're just out.
Yeah.
Because you were 30 seconds late to the call and you didn't listen to one thing the guy said, or he didn't think that you listened to one thing that he said, right? Okay. But yeah, I think, what else? In leverage, what we haven't talked about too is leverage that metals and mining experience. I mean, I don't know how you think about that experience, but people really value industry specific experience.
Okay.
And so I would advise you, don't look at that as investment banking experience. Look at it as metals and mining experience. And I don't mean you're going to go get a job as a financial analyst at a metals and mining publicly traded company, but I mean at a bank. So go to a bank that has metals and mining. You're probably going to see a lot of that in Toronto. I actually had I worked for Barrick Gold. Barrick Gold was one of my clients when I was at Korn Ferry.
Okay, yeah, there you go.
I'm not saying go work for Barrick Gold, but I'm just saying like Canada has a big metals and mining industry. And so that's an opportunity for you. Um, you know, does BMO, CIBC, do these banks have metals and mining practices? I'm sure they do. Well,
Oh,
parlay
all of them do.
your metals and mining experience at the boutique into a metals and mining gig at the bigger job, and then that's your ticket to then get into the States later. And so it's all about like, it's a little, I'm working for a startup now, and I'm just, there's a lot of analogies between you being an undergrad, breaking into this new industry, and actually doing a startup, because there's this little bit of a chicken and the egg process. You're like, okay, well, people want experience, but I can't get experience till I have experience. And so anywhere you can get traction, there's a little bit of a circularity to it, but as long as it's in a spiral and you start to kind of go in the right direction. So what I mean by that is, you got to toehold, not just in investment banking, which is great, but also in metals and mining. So you're going to have a big leg up. If they're evaluating 10 people for an investment banking internship, and it's a bank that has a metals and mining practice, like, you're immediately going to be head and shoulders over 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 of them, especially. And now, it has to go beyond your resume. Like, you can't just put it on your resume, but you have to speak to it, right? You have to tell stories. You have to articulate the language within the metals and mining community, right? Talk about the metrics that are unique to that industry, and use the language. Prove that you have experience. Again, through your, through the language you use, the stories you tell, the skills you demonstrate. If you do that, you'll immediately be head and shoulders over 9 out of 10 people, and that's going to be enough to get the offer. And so really value that experience, especially when you're junior in your career. You don't have that much to stand on. Make sure you really know all the positives that you can stand on with the experience that you do have.
Do you think it might be useful to, I like to work on stock pitches a lot. I've done competitions to make something like a pitch on mining company and maybe send that along as kind of like here's an example of showing that I actually understand this?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, I think there's value in, there's a lot. So let's just be clear. There's a lot of value in doing that for the experience you get running the calculations, again, learning the metrics, the lingo, because every industry has unique metrics, right? In airlines, you've got, revenue per seat mile, right? Okay. Like, if you don't know revenue per seat mile and you're going to go talk to a big MD that focuses on the airline industry, like, you're done. Like, they don't want to talk to you, because it means that you haven't done your research, and you're going to be a burden to the team. So if it helps you learn that lingo by doing the calculations, building the sheet, but I would say the value is in you doing it and then talking about it. I don't know how much value there is in doing it, saving down a PDF, and then emailing the PDF to somebody, unless they ask for it. Now, you could sort of pitch them on and be like, hey, I did this analysis. It's really cool. It's about A, B, and C. And you're just telling them about it. And if they say, wow, that's really cool, actually, could I see that? That would be helpful for me. Then send it to them, right? 100% of the time. But I don't know. I think that's kind of a preference call. If they didn't ask for it, then I don't know. I kind of would hesitate. Okay. I don't see a ton of value there. Again, unless you have inside information, not like literally, but I mean like on the recruiting process, or that individual, like, oh, I did that. Some other an upperclassman says, oh yeah, I did that, and that really impressed so and so. So you should do that too. I guess if you get feedback like that, take their advice. But I don't know, sending unsolicited research, I don't think that will be super effective. It might just be kind of looked at as you're trying too hard.
Okay. Makes sense.
It's kind of walk a balance, like, because you are trying hard, but but you want to be, it's a little bit like, it's a sales process at the end of the day, and nobody wants to buy from a salesperson who's desperate.
Right.
And I'm not saying that you're desperate. I'm saying that when you send stuff like that, you could create that impression in somebody else's mind.
That makes sense. I appreciate that.
So a little bit about be cool, calm, collected, confident. I think the energy you want to bring is more like, I'm getting a job in banking. If you're lucky, it'll be with your company, because I'm going to make your job easier. Now you're not going to say that because that's a little arrogant, but like that's the type of energy you want to bring, and you want to show that by, I did this research, this analysis, I can already run these calculations, and so forth. Are you Adventist certified, by the way? I forget.
I'm not. I'm
Yeah.
in the process,
Oh,
working
you
on
are.
it.
Okay.
Right.
Again, that's going to be another example. Like you're not going to send them your Adventist model that you build, right? Even though you might be proud of it, but you're going to go through that exercise of learning and getting the benefit of learning those skills, and then you can speak to it that yes, I did this, and here's what I learned from it. And it was eye-opening when I was connecting the balance sheet to the cash flow statement because I could see how the inner workings of the three-statement model were starting to come together. Those types of discussions, that helps you stand apart in a positive way throughout the networking and interview process.
Yeah, and I must say quickly to plug Adventus, I even though I haven't completed the certification, I had an interview on Friday. It was like a technical test. I had to build a three-statement model in the DCF, and I had already done that, and so I blew it away. I got another interview next week, so
Love it. Love it. That's why Adventus is powerful. That's such a great example, Jake. And look, man, Adventus didn't do that for you, right? You did it, right? They just gave you the tools, gave you some of the training, the process to follow. But like the real value of Adventus is that it's you doing the work, which means you get the skills, and you can
right.
then build on that and stand on those skills, as opposed to the last finance class you took, where most of the time it was a professor standing at the lectern talking about how smart they are and all the things they did. It's like, okay, I'm listening here, but I'm not. Where's my keystrokes, right? If you're not banging on the keyboard, so it's all about action. That's cool. That's cool. That's a great great anecdote. I appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely.
So, okay. Let me see. You've got one more. Yeah, natural resources. Okay, you also mentioned oil and gas. So, if you think you've got a line on oil and gas, then maybe think about going to Houston, right?
Yes, and that was actually
Um,
something like we got Calgary up here,
yep,
and for me, the reason that I'm considering it is because I've been able to get some experience both through stock pitches, and I also did one financing in oil and gas, and I know that in
nice.
Calgary they don't really care about your target school; they just care, do you know oil and gas? And I'm wondering if that's a similar thing with
It'll be
Houston.
the same in Houston. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like they care more about industry than they do about school. Especially the more unique the industry is.
Right.
Um, Yep, and I'll tell you that's true with. I mean, I've been in executive search for years. That's true with executives. Like they will hire a crappy CFO that has 5 years of their industry experience and pass over the amazing CEO that doesn't have the perfect industry experience. They have like adjacent industry experience. And I would argue that's a lot of times that's a mistake, but I'm just telling you about the way things are. It's just, it's all about risk mitigation. And when you bring that industry experience, your risk goes from here to here, just like that. Which means that your stock price, right, just went up, right? Because when risk goes
Right.
down, your stock price goes up. Same thing in recruiting. It's like a funny little valuation game. But it's all about perceptions, I guess, just like the market. It's all about perceptions because they have to make a decision on you before you actually work there,
Right.
right? And so it's all about their perception but the good news is that you have a say in that. What they think about you, you have a say in that. And they're ultimately just going to compare you to the other people they see. So we've talked about a number of ways to stand out. So for you, like laser focus on that metals and mining, oil and gas, where you have that direct industry experience, and where you don't, and you just want to stand out for the right ways, pound the pavement, get out there in person, tell them your stories about oil and gas, because you're young enough where no one expects you to have industry experience, but so it's not a bad thing if you don't. I'm just saying it gives you a big leg up if you do.
Right.
So
You're right. And I mean, in Canada, the natural resources sector is half the economy, so it's a lot
right,
easier to come up with a story in that field.
yep. And yeah, I bet you'd stand out really positively in Houston, because they probably don't get a lot of folks. I'm sure they do get some folks. I'm sure they do, but It's not going to be like, again, people going from Boston to get a banking job in New York, right? That's
Right.
that's a super highway of kids every year. But the Vancouver to Houston trail is not a very well worn path. And so
If
again,
at
you're going
all.
to stand out. You're going to stand out positively. So cool. Okay. All right, Jake. Well, look, I appreciate you spending some time chatting. I think we'll wrap things up unless you got any last quick questions. We do have about 2-3 minutes. Yeah, just let me give you a quick opportunity. Any last questions? Any last thoughts?
That's all I got to say. But one last thought is it's Remembrance Day here in Canada. I don't know if there's a similar day in the States, but you're a
Yes.
veteran, so thank you for your service.
I appreciate that. It is Veterans Day here in the U.S. I am
There you go.
learning the Canadian holidays now that I work for a Canadian company. I had no idea as you guys have Thanksgiving in October. Like I had no idea that was a thing.
I
So
actually had no idea you guys had Thanksgiving in November until like a few years ago when I tried to, I think last year, because I tried to schedule a call on
right,
Thanksgiving, not realizing that you
right.
have Thanksgiving in
And the
November.
people are looking at you like you're crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, but this is one of those examples where our holidays do line up,
Yeah,
as
there you
a
go.
number of them do. So, you'll also surprise a lot of U.S. citizens to know that Canada does not celebrate July 4th. That'll blow a lot of people's mind. They're like, you guys don't celebrate July 4th? Cool. All right, Jake. Well, hey, look, man, appreciate you. Wishing you the best of luck. Really cool that you're pursuing, the banking path from Vancouver as a Canadian citizen. Look, again, don't you're gonna hit. Just know you're gonna hit roadblocks. There's gonna be setbacks. Just know that going in,
Right.
and it's all a sales process. And the way to get your yes is to get 10 no's first. So
Right.
every no you get, every dead end you hit, just say, you know what? That gets me one step closer to my yes eventually. So just keep going.
All right. Thanks so much, Ben. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. Appreciate it. Take care.
All right. Cheers.